It is a particular joy to welcome author Ilyon Wu, because from the first moment I heard about this book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, I was like on a quest. I had to find this author. And for those of you who've ever tried to book authors, if you can manage to bypass the layers of agents or press reps and find somebody who actually knows them, it does change the game. So, one of the articles in all my research, I discovered a childhood link with author Imani Perry. Now, Imani Perry, who is with us as a presenting author, Imani, you gotta stand up, take a bow. Yes. She won the National Book Award this year. She was also part of our panel. We did a special during COVID. We did do, thanks to Michael Shoulder, we did At Home with Authors, and we produced some virtual programs, one of which was celebrating Juneteenth, and Imani Perry was a critical voice in our production, and you can find that online. So when I read the article that she and Ilyon Wu were childhood friends, like bingo, found my way in. It was great. So I reached out, and we had this connection, and reached out to Ilyon and really conveyed my authentic passion for her book. All roads kind of do lead here, and there is a connection in her book with Nantucket. So there's so much to talk about. Please join me in warmly welcoming author Ilyon Wu. Instantly captivated. Before the book was even published, the buzz was so strong. It's just a story that was not told. It's like brave, hiding in plain sight, audacious, courageous, but about love most of all. How did you find your way to the crafts?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to, oh my gosh, look at you, beautiful Nantucket. I'm so happy to be on this island with all of you. Thank you to the book festival, and especially to you, Mary. It's just, you welcomed me to your home, and also my whole family. And actually, we're missing a child, but my husband and children who have been on this journey with me, I dragged them all the way down to the south, over to the UK, especially the kids. My husband drove on the wrong side of the road, and we all thought we were going to die to do some of this research, but we made it, and this has been, for me, actually a really long spring journey. Starting from January, when the book first came out, I've been on the road a lot. So to have this be a family experience too, has been really, really special. So thank you for having me here.
Great pleasure. Okay, so how did you find your way to the craft?
I found my way through the crafts through a reading experience. You know, I mean, we're all readers here, and I met them through their own written word, which is really amazing to think about when you think about how they were denied literacy as enslaved people. But it was one of their dreams, is to be able to tell their own story. This is one of the reasons why they waited 12 years to be able to do this. So 12 years following their escape, they wrote this incredible narrative. And I was so lucky to have been in graduate school in the time and place that I was. Robert O'Mealy, a wonderful literature teacher and jazz professor, he assigned this narrative. You know, it's 60 pages long. Back then, there wasn't even like a great copy of it. Now you can find it online. I encourage everyone to read this original story because it's very profound and it's its own page turner. And I felt pulled into it. You know, sometimes when you're reading something, again, we all know this as readers, you feel like you're just in another space and another time. And this story, with its incredible heartbreak, but also its wonderful imagination and even humor, it's something that I felt like I couldn't put down. I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about all these just incredible moments of suspense where you just don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know especially what happened before and after the journey, which they don't talk about. So it was a reading experience that launched it all for me.
Well, I read the original, so I read the original work, and you can find it. It actually is available now, 1,000 Miles to Freedom. And it really begins with a declarative statement that you're caught by, because it is in William, and it's in their words talking about the Declaration of Independence and how that did not apply to them. Mm-hmm. They were not freed citizens. They were not equal. And it was a really declarative statement, but what was so interesting is it's the entire brief book. It's very declarative, it's very strong, it's powerful, their words. But you, and I just want to note this for anyone who doesn't know, Ilyon is a BA Humanities at Yale, PhD, English, Columbia, Dr. Wu. So we would say historian, however, it's the literature, what you took, for those who will read this book, Ilyon crafted a narrative, a story that brought the story to life. We feel the textures, we feel the passion, we feel the sights, the sounds. What was it of an alchemy of an idea that allowed you to take that leap from historical archives in this book to actually make everything come alive?
Thank you. Well, that's what I really set out to do, because we have the starting narrative. It is so strong on its own. It is so brief. It tells us something. It tells us about the original journey. But really, that 1,000-mile journey from Macon, Georgia, to the Free States, it's actually just the beginning. And there's a story before that, and there's a story after that. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, what I want to do is do something for the crafts, enhance the story, and do something for it that it hasn't done by itself. And the thing is, the truth of the matter is, they wrote their story under tremendous pressure. I mean, one of the reasons why they were writing the story was because they still had family members, loved ones who were in bondage. And so there were things that they could not or would not say. So that's what I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out those unanswered questions, especially having to do with their family members, why they ran. And on top of that, I mean, I just wanted a deep dive into the 19th century. Like, what did it feel like to actually ride on one of these trains? They are so busy, rightfully, telling this story, like telling, the exciting moments of the journey. They're not telling you what's outside the window. They can take for granted that 19th century readers are going to know what that feels like. But I wanted to know, what was it like to wear a corset? What were those clothes like that Ellen Craft was putting on one by one? What was it like to how did they move from station to station, from place to place? I wanted the texture of it. I wanted the feel of the time and space. So that's what I set out to do.
And you so accomplished it. So for those, it's giveaway here, but for those who have not yet read this book, give the premise, because it is why it's a story untold, hiding in plain sight. How did you choose to begin this book?
Well, the overview of the story is this. There's an enslaved couple, William and Ellen Craft, who are actually husband and wife. They are not husband and wife by law, but to each other. They are married. And in 1848, they go on this incredible journey of self-emancipation, mutual self-emancipation, where they pose as master and slave. Not in the way you might expect, because it's Ellen Craft who has inherited the light complexion of her father, who was also her first enslaver. It's Ellen Craft who crosses lines of race, ability, gender, and class, pretending to be a rich, white, disabled enslaver, while William plays the role of the slave. So they go, you're talking about the story being out in plain, or hidden in plain sight. That's exactly what the Crafts were doing, right? They traveled on the railroads, on the steamships. They rode the technology revolution that was going on this time. This was an incredible revolutionary year with democratic revolt, information revolution, transportation revolution, and they really rode them all. So they get to the north, but that's really just the beginning. That 1,000-mile journey is the beginning of really a journey of a lifetime.
But it's also almost immediately, so you can imagine, enslaved people who escape, if they are caught, they are tortured. They are made example so that no other slave will dare to try this escape. So it is why it is so bold and audacious to be literally Ellen disguised as a young, wealthy gentleman with her own husband as her slave. They encountered danger almost immediately on the train. What happened there?
Oh, Yeah, I mean, from the very first stop, and I actually want to just pause for a minute on, you raised this really important point, which is the consequences for if they are caught. And so this is actually why they take a while to go on this journey. They fall in love, and Ellen does not want to get married until they know that their not only their safety, their freedom, but the freedom of their unborn children will be secure, because they experienced such trauma as children in bondage. They did not want to pass that on. But the ways of escaping are so challenging at this time. I mean, they're in the middle of Georgia. There's no underground railroad here. All the routes out of the city, the bridges, the railroads, everything is watched, and you can look at these old Georgia statutes and see the consequences, like the bodily, physical consequences that you will face if you are an enslaved person and you are out and you're caught without a pass, without a written permission to be on the road. So they are landlocked, and they decided they're going to love first and escape later once they have a plan. And it takes them a long time to figure this out.
And I want to add this for everybody who doesn't understand, but if they would have a child together, that child, that long arm of slavery grabs that child, and that child belongs to the enslaver. And then families, which this is what they're reckoning with, is families, they have all grown up being torn apart, being torn from their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers. They all experience the trauma of such pain, loss, separation, that part of their vow was their child is not going to be enslaved. Their child will be free. And that is part of what is the armor of allowing them the courage to take this trip.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was reflecting a lot on this after the wonderful presentation on freedom narratives last night, and particularly on what my childhood friend, Imani Perry, was saying about freedom is not just about being unfettered. It's about being able to create and preserve those bonds of family, of love, and not having those taken away. So it's both about being unfettered, but also being bound. And they wanted to be bound to each other and bound to their children in ways that these bonds will not be broken. And they say that from the very beginning of their narrative. It's really moving. And for me, when I found the actual documents, I mean, here's another sort of freedom, is the question of literacy and the power of literacy and the power of the word to free somebody. I mean, you can free somebody on a piece of paper. You can also consign them and generations of their family, posterity, to bondage, which is exactly what Ellen Craft's biological father does. He writes this, he's in this beautiful script, he writes a deed in which he gives his daughter, Ellen Craft, to another daughter. And the biggest irony, the most horrible thing about this, beautifully penned paper is to see, he says, out of the love I have for my daughter, Eliza, I'm giving her this property. And this property is his unacknowledged daughter, Ellen.
And the reason she has to leave the house is because Ellen, who is very light-skinned, so resembles her actual father, her enslaver, that the wife, you can imagine, here we are at home, the wife is getting overly suspicious the older this child gets, who bears this incredible resemblance to her husband. So what does she want to do? Get rid of that enslaved child. So that, hence this gift of being given.
Thank you for that. And if you go back to the narrative, I mean, there's one sentence on the first page of this narrative that kind of sums up the entire situation. It's written in William Craft's voice. So even though scholars now acknowledge this as being a jointly produced narrative, it's written from William's point of view. And in his voice, it says, my wife's first master was her father, and her mother his slave, and the latter is still the slave of his widow. I mean, there's so many layers there that basically the book in many ways is an unpacking of all those layers. And the fact that he says this in this present tense, is still, for me, that's part of what gave it the story that I was reading a feeling of urgency, where you can see the past and the present. It feels like it's unfolding. And actually, my initial draft of this, my goal was to write this in the present tense, to be able to show that past and present are together. It didn't work out that way because there was too much past. The past hung too heavy, and it was a great idea, but the structure didn't hold. But that's the feeling that I wanted to give to the story, this presence, this urgency of now.
The urgency begins almost immediately. Mm-hmm. So they're on the train.
Yes.
And almost immediately, their lives, and again, the consequences are so severe. Almost immediately, what did they encounter?
They encounter from the very first train stop in Macon, they encounter 3 people they know. So they encounter a man who takes Ellen's luggage, and he was actually somebody who'd wanted to marry her before. So that's one pass. The second, they're waiting in the train. They finally made it inside the train. Ellen has got the tickets, and looking outside, they see a familiar shape running towards the train and looking into the cars, and that is William Craft's employer, this cabinet maker. He had this strange hunch that something was off, and he didn't know what it was, but he followed it, and he followed it to the train station, and so he's number 2. And then when the train starts taking off, also, Ellen is sitting, and sort of before she can even catch her breath, she looks to the side, and there is a man who she served dinner just the night before.
So that she's in disguise, and they also were incredibly strategic because they had to think through, if you were traveling, she was posing as a wealthy gentleman, you would have to sign when you would get to your next destination, you get to a hotel, you need to sign your name. Well, they were not literate. They didn't know how to sign their names. And then she also understood that she would have to, if she might have to be in conversation, which would be another dead giveaway. Mm-hmm. So they crafted like poultices on her face, put her arm in a sling, so unable to be able to sign. So they crafted this disguise that would kind of answer those questions, which was incredibly strategic, mm-hmm. Extraordinary. So as this journey progresses, they do make their way off. They do keep on. So that sense of urgency you craft, and to kind of jump into where they really are kind of fleeing for their lives, but meeting also unbelievable kindness. When they get to Philadelphia, and they said, most truly like family, it was Quakers, and it kind of resonates here, this was a Quaker community, that they really took them under their wings. They were white abolitionist Quakers who took care of them, and they were the first kind of aspect of human kindness. How did you find them? How did you find your way to them?
I am so lucky that the Crafts wrote this narrative, because they do talk about this incredible encounter with the Quaker family, who actually, in the first moments of knowing them, Ellen realizes the prejudices that she herself carries. So it's a turning point in her experience of the world as well. She's never had white people come to her in this way and show this kind of kindness, not knowing who she was, because one of the many ironies of the initial journey is that people want to help her because they think that she's this privileged, disabled man. So there's some pretty humorously set up situations that they describe in which this happens. But the tragedy, of course, is that if they had any idea who they really were, all of that, the opposite would happen. But in this case, these are white people, friends, who see them for who they are, friends in the Quaker sense and friends in our regular, everyday sense.
Right, and so as they hit Philadelphia and realize their lives are really in danger, they really have to continue to flee, so they are fleeing to Boston, but they end up in this community of abolitionists and freedom fighters, and it is white and black together. And William, tell us a little bit about William Wells Brown and who he was to the Crafts.
Okay. I love William Wells Brown. I don't know how you feel about him. People tend to have very strong feelings about this man. Self-emancipated, best-selling author, incredible speaker and performer, charismatic man who would routinely speak in spaces like this and just have the whole crowd wrapped. Incredible storyteller. And he not only can tell a good story, but he knows one when he hears one. So as soon as the Crafts get to Philadelphia, he gets wind of this story, and he thinks this could be transformative for so many different people. So he goes to find them, and he goes to the underground spot, the Quaker home where the Crafts are hiding and sort of recovering. And he tells them, "You have this incredible story, and the world needs to hear it." I'm sure they were also really well aware of the risks, because I mean, if you think about it, William Wells Brown comes to them within days of their escape. They've experienced this lifetime of bondage. We didn't talk about the timing of the incredible journey either, but it was incredibly compressed. They had 4 days in which they conceived of the plan, got all the pieces for it, 4 days in which they actually executed the escape.
And scrambled to have to make adjustments.
Absolutely.
When there were problems.
Yeah, and they're worn down and they're sick, and they're also in danger. They know they're not safe once they reach the north. They know that slave hunters could come after them at any time. And here's this man who comes in with this incredible story, this incredible charisma. He tells them, the world needs to hear your story. And so they travel another 1,000 miles. They double their mileage as they zigzag all across New England, telling their story and becoming really celebrities.
And I imagine the bravery, because they are speaking. Their voices and their faces are public now. And it is like a fire starts, there's ripples of excitement. And what you crafted with this book too is to bring that sense of being alive, the abolitionist movement, because there were so many who were passionately opposed to slavery, and you feel the sense of those boundaries of humans gathering steam to support, help, make sure they are not endangered. And I think of the white abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. So talk about his role with the Crafts.
Well, I actually can I back up for just a minute?
Absolutely.
Because what you say about abolitionism is so important. And at the same time, there are so many people who are also ready to send the Crafts back.
Absolutely.
So the abolitionists were actually really a minority at this time, and it was all the more brave for them to go on the road. I mean, William Wells Brown was a very careful scheduler of these kind of events, and he took them where he thought they could do maximum good, but also where he thought they could be safe. So he's traveled, Douglas is traveling around the same time too. They've already gone all over the place. They've seen the different areas and which ones are going to pelt you with refuse or knock you down. They call it an abolitionist baptism, where you get pelted by rotten eggs and things like that. I've lost track of your original question, but I did want to just say, so when they're coming into these spaces, I mean, there's actually one sort of really powerful moment of archival discovery that I had that I'd like to share with you, where there's a big newspaper report in The Liberator where the Crafts are in Faneuil Hall, and just imagine a hall like this, bigger. It's packed. There are ladies with these, skirts spread out. There are people all the way up, upstairs, encircled. The Crafts are newly free.
And this was a place of selling slaves. Faneuil Hall was a place where slaves were sold. For them to enter this space is so extraordinary.
And so they're in Boston, and they're on the stage, and William Wells Brown is having a call and response, which is actually kind of this technique is something that happened here too with Douglas and Garrison. But he does this call and response where he says, "Who among you would return these people to slavery?" And everything is silent, right? "Who among you will do nothing if the slave hunters come after these people?" And then the last question is, who among you will stand up and fight with these people and help protect them? And then what the Liberator describes is this everlasting yay. So yes, like waves of affirmation, yes upon yes upon yes, and it feels like the sound is ringing and it will never go away. So they are awash in this sound. So this is one of the experiences they have on the lecture circuit. This is one that's a natural moment of drama, but what I discovered by looking at actually not the abolitionist papers, but the papers written by the Boston Post. So there's a journalist who is kind of looking skeptically at all of this, and he's sitting in the back, and he reports that in this call and response, there is a loud yes. When they say, will you send them back? Somebody says yes. And can you imagine being William and Ellen Craft on the stage and hearing even at least one voice saying, we will send you back? So the other yeses wash over that. But if you just read one point of view, you don't get the reality of the fact that there were people on the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
Who would mean harm. Here's our intersection on Nantucket. So these two forces, and you've mentioned Douglass, well, that is Frederick Douglass, and he actually gave one of his very first speeches here at the Nantucket Athenaeum and held an audience captive. He was a powerful orator. But he and William Lord Garrison, whom Garrison met Frederick Douglass here on Nantucket. But they ended up kind of in opposing forces, though, because Garrison was very much anti-violence, whereas Frederick Douglass was really moving towards this fight for freedom, that democracy could be imperiled. Mm-hmm. And there were elements here that the fugitive slave law of 1850 changed course. It put teeth and grabbed people. Tell us and explain what was the change with that Fugitive Slave Act.
It gives superpowers to the enslavers. So they already had, by the terms of the Constitution, the so-called Fugitive Slave Clause. They already had, also from a pre-existing Fugitive Slave Act, they knew that they had the legal power to go in. But there were personal liberty laws, all sorts of things being passed to thwart the slave enslavers. And what this law does is it gives them this musculature. Ibram Kendi calls this octopus powers. So you can almost see this arm reaching over state lines. So they can not only, so somebody like Robert Collins, not only can he himself come up here and demand and raise a posse and bring the Crafts before a judge or a specially appointed commissioner who, these figures of legal power are no longer state people. So you can bypass the state, go straight to the federal government, and there's no way for people like the Crafts or people who look like the Crafts or who might be taken for the Crafts to fight back. If you have those witnesses, they are carried back. Not only that, but everybody is called upon. Any good citizen can be called upon to essentially join a slave posse and be required at the risk of imprisonment and huge fines to come and help hunt these people down. I mean, that's just two parts of this incredible octopus tentacled beast of a law that transforms everything. Because up until this point, the Crafts have been traveling, they are known names, the enslavers don't do anything. But at this point, Robert Collins, Ellen Craft's enslaver, decides, you know what? I'm not just going to go after them. I'm going to make this a test of the fugitive slave law and a test case for the whole nation. So it just explodes.
So he sends two slave hunters. And again, I hope all of you will read this book because it's enthralling. And again, the sense of life, texture, I really felt like I learned a piece of history, but because you brought it to life. So talk about, because it was, in some ways, it's almost amusing, but the path that was taken to thwart these two slave hunters was enthralling. And again, the textures and all the pieces, I'm not sure how you found your way to all of that, but talk a little bit about what happened in that hunt.
The hunt was, so what I actually did to be able to try to figure this out, because I knew the contours of it, and this story is all about the how. I mean, we know, obviously, it's not like they're going to die in the first couple pages. We know that they're going to somehow make it, but it's a how that they do it that's really kept me at the edge of my seat, even to the end. Even now, when I think about these moments, I'm like, how did they do this? How did they do this? But what I did was I took all these different newspapers and correspondences, every single possible source that I could get my hands on. And I created like hundreds of pages of timelines. And I had this super nerdy chart. So there was William, there was Ellen, there was Slave Hunter 1, Slave Hunter 2, because there are two of them who come up. There's Robert Collins, and then there are other figures. So those are over here, and then the time is over here. And from moment to moment, as soon as, or even before the slave hunters come, I started saying, where are they? Where are they in space and time? Where are they in relationship to one another? And when you see, it's been described as like a cat and mouse game, or a chess pieces moving across the board. And you could see, like at one point, the crafts are hiding like within a rifle shot distance, they say, of where the slave hunters are. There's one point where the slave hunters are, this is night, they're getting really frustrated. All these judges are just like, passing them back and forth like a hot potato, and they finally show up at the house of one, and they're like, look, you gotta get me a warrant so I can capture these people. And this judge says, why don't you just go over there right now? It's literally a 10-minute walk. I've walked this distance myself. No, actually, that particular distance, it's like a 5-minute walk. So they're so close by physically in space, and yet, that's, I guess, where the drama came from. It did eventually, but in the beginning I was so excited by all these different moves that I wrote a draft with my wonderful editor, Dawn Davis, who commented in this particular section. She said, I just remember that, she's like, this, that, they're going here, they're going there. And you're like, we don't need to know all that.
But it's kind of fascinating to hear, because I'm always interested in how things work. So It's actually fascinating to hear for you, how you stitch together, because I'm promising all of you, it is a tapestry of such rich dimension and story and narrative. So it's fascinating, but I do love where really they are so thwarted. These two slave hunters are so thwarted, and there's one that it's almost amusing what happens to them at the end. Explain what happened in one key moment with these two slave hunters. They were thwarted.
They were, but again, the how is, I think, one of the chapters I call A World Turned Upside Down. And actually that comes from somewhere else besides just a Hamilton reference, but yes, it is also a Hamilton reference. Because the slave hunters, they think, they are going to be the heroes. They are going to enforce this law. They leave Macon as heroes. When they leave the trade station, everyone's, wishing them well. They got up to this place, and it's like they've switched places. There's a rogue team of lawyers who do all kinds of they're up to all these different kinds of shenanigans, and they have the slave hunters arrested, so then other people can see what they look like. And they have these written descriptions that go up on these handbills, not flattering descriptions of what these gentlemen look like. And so they are being pursued, and they walk out of Court Square at one point, and they're seeing thousands of people, like a multiracial army of people, standing up against them. And this is their world turned upside down. So for me, to see that, to sort of get that panoramic scope through John Knight's eyes, that was a really interesting experience.
And that was where it was so exciting, because they for once understood what it was to be captive, to have eyes in a very punishing fashion. So that was just I thought how you crafted it was so thrilling. So panoramic also, we better actually, time is tick-tocking. They actually have to then flee. Ultimately, they do need to flee Boston, and they end up making a jump. And again, William Wells Brown plays a role. They do flee to England to find a sense of safety. And speaking of panoramic, what did they craft? What did Brown craft to help craft this story of crafts?
I love your craft fun. It's just it's impossible to help, isn't it?
Yeah.
So William Wells Brown, he he is like a multimedia artist ahead of his time. He was a singer, a performer, all these different kinds of things, and he sees this panorama. There's a panorama of the Mississippi River, and he sees this thing that everyone's watching. It's called like the biggest painting in the world. Some of these are like literally miles long, and they unfurl, and it's like a precursor of the movie. Some of them move. And so he sees this, and he sees this Mississippi panorama, and the river, he was on that river. He actually had to be a slave trader's assistant on that river. So he's had a view of this river like no other. This is his home. There is no indication of the life or the people that he's known. So he says, I'm going to make my own panorama, and I'm going to put us in the picture. So he makes this panorama, and he and William and Ellen travel with this thing, with this giant painting. And you just imagine in a space, again, like this. I visited them in the UK, and there are halls like this. Lights are low. There's a giant painting behind us. Here's William Wells Brown. He's telling you the story. He's lighting up pieces of it, and William and Ellen Craft are with them. This is the kind of thing, incredible adventure that they have on the road.
But it's, and that's again what was so surprising in reading this, and again, it's your skill and craft at literature, is you could feel it was so ahead of its time in its very modern presentation. It also allowed the crafts financial freedom. England was free. It was the first time they could actually take a breath and be free. And it was where they could then begin to learn how to read, how to write. And your pages, and I'm just going to show so many extraordinary figures, and these faces are so much a part of this story, which is really an extraordinary accounting. And the crafts, I feel like, well, you're really going to have to read the book to understand the whole ending, but they do go on to craft lives that are incredibly meaningful with children. And we're going to open this to questions in a moment, but I have one that I think about the rich book you've created with archival records, being able to go back, go through history, newspapers. I think about today. What if somebody's writing about someone today? I think this 21st century, our emails are private. No one's writing letters. People, you were able to go back and see written communications, see news. So what do you think in the 21st century we're doing with everyone communicating via their own private emails?
Well, there's so many different ways to tell a story. And I think actually, as much as they wrote down their story, and I use the archives to do this, there's a powerful oral storytelling tradition, and now I guess in video and movie and all these other forms. So I think there are new ways to be inventive. I wish that more children growing up could read script, because it's going to be hard to decode those manuscripts.
Right.
But
I don't know how to read
maybe
cursive.
It'll be another thing that ChatGPT can't do. That we can do by having the texture of these things at our fingertips, to be able to read and decipher these stories.
Well, Ilyon brings you brought the texture, you brought the life, you made history alive in the most captivating, enthralling fashion. So we thank you. We're going to open this to some questions, because I'm sure our audience must surely have some.
I'm wondering if you know anything about their descendants. Are some of them alive, and do they know about your book, and is there a story?
Thank you for that question. Yes, the Crafts have an amazing extended family of descendants. The ones I know are mostly through their first freeborn child, Charles S. Lynn Phillips Craft. And I just want to bring attention to one, Peggy Trotter Damon Priestley, who's a freedom writer and an oral historian, a poet. You can find her, if you Google her, she has her own website, and she has a lot of that history. It's been incredible to get to know the descendants of the Crafts. It's something that was important to me from the very beginning. I was just talking about oral history. There's stories that get passed down, and that there's a knowledge that comes through the family that you can't get anywhere else. One of the things I actually recently learned that they had discovered was I write about 6 children here. 5 of them were surviving, but it turns out there was a 7th child, who was born and died in the UK. So I'm constantly learning new things about them through the family. Sometimes I have to kind of pinch myself, actually, because I'm texting with a great-great-granddaughter, texting no less, and she just sent me this beautiful picture of her grandfather, Henry Kempton Craft. And to think that Henry Kempton Craft, I mean, she was held by this man and loved by this man, her grandfather. And Henry Kempton Craft remembers being by William Craft's side in this. We didn't even talk about like the fact that they go back to Georgia and they start this incredible educational and farming cooperative, and it's right at the intersection of a railroad. So Henry Kempton Craft is with his grandfather, and they're watching the train go by, because every day William would go and watch the trains go by. So we're 2 touches away from this history. From great-great-granddaughter to grandfather to the Crafts. It's so nearby, and they are continuing to tell their story also in new ways. This is again why this story is not, it might not be as widely remembered nationally, but it's never been forgotten because they've preserved their ancestors' legacy.
This is history come alive, so it's living on. Another question?
Yes.
Maybe I missed it, but how old was this couple when they started their journey?
So the escape was in 1848. Ellen Craft was born in 1826, and William was 1823. So they're in their 20s. I'm terrible. For some reason, I always forget how to do this math. I can't even subtract anymore. But they were in their 20s. They were incredibly young. People noticed, because they do in the media, that they were really good looking, really charismatic. That also helped them to become stars on the road.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We have time for one last question.
Movie rights?
You know, I feel like the story was born for the screen and for the stage and for a painting and everything, you know. I actually do know of potential projects that are in the works. I'm not actually attached to them, but the descendants are. And I know that I can't wait to see the story on the big screen. And in fact, when I was most stuck writing this story, because besides that horrible chart that manifested into the this, that draft, there was another really horrible draft that I wrote early on. This has been a book that I've written and rewritten, I don't know, I think like 10 times. But I ended up using screenwriting techniques to craft every chapter and every section of this book. I wanted to have that muscular sense of movement. I mean, you don't have a single wasted moment in a movie, right? Partly because it's so expensive. And I wanted to have that feeling too. So I studied films. So in a way that there's some of that encoded in the book itself.
Which does lead me to this one too, though. So how long, from start to finish, how long did it take you to create this book?
Full time, I started on this in 2016. So research and writing I did simultaneously. I didn't know how that was supposed to work. People told me that you do that, but that's what I did for this book. And it took 6 years. But I first read their narrative over 20 years ago, so it's been something I've been thinking about for a really long time.
It is something just to appreciate for all of us that each book is the repository of another person's depth of intellect and thought and sensibility. So, Ilyon, we thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.